Right, so Keir Starmer can always be relied upon to take the heat off the Tories when they're in a spot of bother, be it Sunak's not quite published tax returns implying he's still hiding stuff, or Boris Johnson getting hauled over the coals, not to mention the actual important stuff to our everyday lives, such as inflation rises, our wages not rising, and the cost of living crisis continuing seemingly unabated. But Team Keith, after relaunch number 11, was it 12? God, it's so hard to keep track these days. It's so easy to lose count. They've decided to push ahead with more of their blank beige brand of politics anyway, continuing to trot out his 5 missions. This was his latest statement in his latest, whatever number it was, relaunch. And this time he gave a speech in Port Vale up in Stoke, referring to his mission on law and order, breaking it down into what he called his one rule for all proposals, which just sounds like a sci-fi channel knockoff of the Lord of the Rings to me, but as it turns out, is more knockoff Tory mantra, but not just any old Tory mantra, because, and I apologise if you're not familiar with the Lord of the Rings, but if you consider the Tories of today to be analogous to a bunch of orcs and goblins, Keith just invoked the Tory equivalent of Sauron. So what did he do then, Damo? Well, Starmer stood there and said, "We're here today for the launch of Labour's second national mission to make our streets safe and stop criminals getting away without punishment. Now, if you think that sounds basic, something that should be guaranteed in a country like ours, then let me tell you, you're right. Nothing is more important, more fundamental to a democracy like ours. The rule of law is the foundation for everything. Margaret Thatcher called it the first duty of government, and she was right about that. An expression of individual liberty, our rights and responsibilities, but also justice, fairness, equality, one rule for all." Yeah, the accent hasn't gone on away, I'm afraid. No Labour MP, though, representative, councillor, let alone leader, should ever invoke Margaret Thatcher as being right about anything, though. It should sound alarm bells, regardless of what wing of the party you belong to. Thatcher oversaw the devastation of our industries, our manufacturing base, oversaw mass unemployment, oversaw mass privatisation of so many of our public services. Equalities fell by the wayside, crime rates rose. There was nothing fair in anything she did. She stood for everything Labour should be opposed to. But of course, no Labour government since her day functionally has been. And the opportunity to finally bring an end to her politics, which to this day we all still suffer under, which was presented to us in both 2017 and 2019, is gone. Now replaced by a wooden marionette of a man whose strings are operated by the likes of Tony Blair, a man Thatcher called her greatest achievement, neutering the Labour Party as he did, ending any meaningful opposition to her policies. It's back to Blair under Starmer, just devoid of anything resembling charisma with it. But if Starmer had an ounce of the honesty and integrity he pretends to possess, he wouldn't have chosen this quote of all quotes to use here. Margaret Thatcher, back in 1975, as the then leader of the Tory opposition, gave a speech, which Starmer here has referenced, of which I'll read the relevant part and then come on to the horrific context of it afterwards. She said, "The first people to uphold the law should be governments. It is tragic that the socialist government, to its lasting shame, should have lost its nerve and shed its principles over the People's Republic of Clay Cross, and that a group of the Labour Party should have tried to turn the Shrewsbury pickets into martyrs. On both occasions, the law was broken. On one, violence was done. No decent society can live with that. No responsible party should condone it. The first duty of government is to uphold the law. If it tries to bob and weave and duck around the duty when it's inconvenient, if government does that, then so will the governed, and then nothing is safe. Not home, not liberty, not life itself. There is one part of this country where tragically defiance of the law is costing life day after day. In Northern Ireland, our troops have the dangerous and thankless task of trying to keep peace and hold the balance. We are proud of the way they have discharged their duty." That's enough of that, frankly. You will have heard Starmer's snippet that he pinched for his own pitch on law and order there, but there are 3 pieces of context essential for people to understand in what Thatcher was saying there, which Starmer has branded himself with now by associating himself with this speech. She referred to the People's Republic of Clay Cross. Now, Clay Cross was a Labour council which 2 years previous to Thatcher's statement stood against the then Tory government's attempt to force rent increases on social housing via their Rent Act, prior to which councils were able to set their own rent levels appropriate to local economies. And despite councils across the country saying they'd join and fight this, when it came down to it, only Clay Cross remained opposed to it. In January of 1973, the district auditor punished the 11 Clay Cross councillors by finding them all guilty of negligence and misconduct over this, and they were all surcharged or fined £6,350. And this was done jointly, which meant each councillor was then liable for the total, taking them over a £2,000 limit on such fines, which resulted in each and every one of them being automatically disqualified from the council. A second 11 councillors had to be elected and were elected, and they decided to copy their predecessors too. They got the same treatment for it sometime later, although they got a lower fine, still high enough to see them expelled and taken off the council. However, before that happened, meanwhile, they operated a policy of non-cooperation with the housing commissioner who had been sent by the government to collect the rents. The council refused to increase them point blank, keeping them where they were, and by the time the Tories got dumped out of power in 1974, he hadn't been able to collect a single penny. People power, proper Labour. If anyone watches the Not the Andrew Marr show regularly, they'll be familiar with a chap called John Dunn. He was one of those Clay Cross councillors. Starmer, however, invoked Thatcher instead, attacking the then Labour government for not dealing with Clay Cross. They, to their shame, never lifted the surcharges on these councillors when they came into power in 1974, taking over from the Tories who put this Rent Act into place. But whose side do you think Starmer would have been on in all of this? The second issue in Thatcher's hated speech related to the Shrewsbury martyrs, the Shrewsbury 24, convicted for unlawful assembly, conspiracy to intimidate and affray the year before she made that horrid speech in 1974. This story revolves around industrial action being taken on building sites across Shrewsbury in 1972. Amongst the 24 prosecuted for these alleged crimes was royal family actor Ricky Tomlinson, who was amongst the picketers bussed in to demonstrate as part of so-called flying pickets, something Thatcher herself later made illegal when she became Prime Minister in the 80s. They always denied the charges, these 24, and with the original witness statements having been destroyed from the cases against them, they felt their convictions were unsafe. For years, they faced blacklisting, they faced persecution because of these convictions hanging over their heads. And it took them decades to clear their names, but clear their names they eventually did, with the convictions eventually quashed, but not until the 2010s. We, of course, know Thatcher was no friend of strikes, the miners' strikes, the violent scene. She talks of violence being instigated by these 24 that proved to be quashed, proved to be false. But we have seen violence said on behalf of her government. Orgreave being probably the best known of these most violent anti-strike moves by the powers that be during the 1980s. That was Thatcher's rule of law in action there, that Starmer has invoked again now. Justice still yet to be seen for the victims of those events back then. But it was okay when Thatcher was busting in police, or was it the army dressed up as police back then? But not ordinary people striking for a fair deal. It's also not like Starmer has shown himself to be that supportive of strikes himself either, when as soon as he became Labour leader, he stopped appearing on picket lines himself and banned his front bench from doing likewise. Trade unions putting faith in him really need to wake the hell up now. Incidentally, Starmer used a video of Ricky Tomlinson supporting him during his leadership election campaign, and now he positively quotes somebody who kicked Tomlinson when he was down. I hope it's a case of my arse still supports Keith now. Thirdly, there was the final part of the speech, the British Army keeping law and order in Northern Ireland, and a great many of us should be very, very familiar with this, as if that was ever the case. But this speech of Thatcher came just 3 years after the bloody Sunday massacre, so it was appallingly tin-eared, though of course, for the time, she got away with it. Margaret Thatcher spent her entire time decimating the lives of the working class, the class she herself came from. Not that you know it, carrying on as she did like she was the bloody Queen. Starmer is equally distanced from his alleged roots, praising Margaret Thatcher, calling her right, all within the space of 10 seconds at the beginning of a speech on law and order, here and now, in this day and age. And right after the findings of the Casey report invites feelings of both ridicule and nausea in equal measure. I grew up through Thatcher. I saw the toll it took on my parents, my family. She destroyed hope, aspiration, families, communities, and that's nothing to appeal to me whatsoever. Crime during her way too long tenure in power rose from 2.5 million recorded crimes in 1979 to 4.5 million by the time she went in 1990. So she failed even on her own terms, much like Starmer fails to convince anybody that he's anything but a deceitful wrong-un. He can keep lurching to the right. He's an authoritarian in the making. So what did Starmer promise to deliver, apart from more Thatcherism then? There must have been something of substance in this speech to bother. But does it really matter? Would you believe anything he told you anyway? He said he wants to halve violent crime and raise confidence in the police and justice system. How then? Well, there's the rub with Starmer, isn't it? The how. It never gets answered, and it's why the actual intent of these speeches of his always ends up instantly forgotten. They're pretty much pointless. As for his own record on justice, after all, he never lets us forget how he was the director of public prosecutions. How about his failure to prosecute the killer of Ian Tomlinson, a newspaper vendor struck by a Met Police officer, or reaffirming the decision not to prosecute the Met Police killers of Jean-Charles de Menezes? He's so tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime, he once had a man prosecuted for stealing 2 scoops of ice cream who ended up getting 16 months in prison and then deported. And then there's Julian Assange, of course. Need us say any more? Following the Casey report earlier this week into the Met Police, he had the neck to praise good officers within it in his speech too. With him in charge of law and order, we'll get much as we've seen with his approach to the Ford report, I expect, banning his own executive from even meeting with Martin Ford and discussing his report on internal bullying and racism in the Labour Party. Why should we believe Starmer will act on anything meaningful if he gets to run the country? Way to better things, especially when he quotes the one person whose politics has led to things becoming as bad as they have. Let's stick with his own party for a moment longer, though, because there's evidence he's hiding at least 2 sex pests on his front bench. They remain unnamed still, though. But he's also just readmitted right-wing MP Neil Coyle after suspension due to racism and sexual harassment. That suspension was more than Chester MP Chris Matheson got when he was being investigated by Parliament for sexual harassment. He eventually resigned when he was found guilty, but Labour took no action against him throughout all of that. There is also the complete lack of support and empathy for the domestic violence suffered by Poplar and Limehouse MP Epsana Bacon. Starmer is a joke. The trouble is the punchline is a groaner. He's a blasted Tory. End of story. Thanks for watching. If you appreciated this video, please do hit like and subscribe, leave a comment and hit the notification bell too so you don't miss the next one. Also look out for me on social media and other interesting stuff by clicking on the Linktree link in the comments below. And I will see you next time. Cheers, folks.